One ordinary Tuesday morning, a quiet father stepped into a glass lobby carrying a manila envelope and a thermos of cold coffee. He had one goal: deliver some paperwork and get home before 3 o'clock. But the moment a violent gang leader slammed a CEO to the marble floor and demanded she sign over her company, every employee in that building froze. Every security guard backed away. Every camera in the room captured what happened next. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew what he'd left behind. But that father in the worn jacket walked forward anyway. If you're watching this right now, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if it moves you, hit that like button and stay until the end. This one is worth it. The envelope was unremarkable. Standard manila, clasp closure, the kind you could buy 40 of for $6 at any office supply store. Ethan Grayson had tucked it under his arm that morning the same way he'd tucked 1,000 similar documents under his arm over the past 3 years. Without ceremony, without thought, because the job didn't require thought anymore, and that was mostly fine with him. He'd taken the 742 bus because his truck was in the shop for the third time that month. The mechanic, a heavy-set man named Dale, who smelled permanently of diesel and cinnamon gum, had told him Thursday at the earliest. Maybe Friday. Ethan had nodded and said that was fine. And it was fine because he'd learned a long time ago not to argue with things that were simply going to be what they were. The morning commute had been unremarkable too. He'd stood near the rear doors, thermos in one hand, envelope under his arm, watching the city slide past the scratched window. A woman across from him had been arguing quietly into her phone about something that sounded like a lease dispute. A kid, maybe 14, sat with earbuds in and eyes closed, head tipping toward sleep. A man in a delivery uniform had gotten on at 6th Street and immediately begun checking a handwritten list. Ordinary. Ethan appreciated ordinary. He got off at the stop on Halcyon Avenue and walked the 3 blocks to Crownstone Dynamics on foot. The building was hard to miss. 40 stories of glass and steel that caught the morning light and threw it in directions that seemed almost aggressive. He'd been here twice before for smaller jobs. The lobby always made him vaguely uncomfortable. Too much open space, too many angles, too many people moving in patterns that didn't quite sync up. He'd spent enough years in environments where awareness was survival, and spaces like this one, beautiful, exposed, designed to impress rather than function, set something low in his chest on a slow, quiet hum. He pushed through the revolving door at 8:47 in the morning. The lobby was doing its usual thing. Marble floors, high ceilings, a reception desk the length of a small boat, and the ambient sound of maybe 200 people moving through, talking quietly, swiping badges, queuing for the elevators. A security checkpoint sat 10 feet inside the entrance. 2 guards, a bag scanner, a walk-through frame. Ethan had his contractor credentials ready before he even reached the belt. Grayson, he told the guard, engineering documents for facilities. Contract number C119. The guard, a young woman with a neat bun and reading glasses pushed up on her head, took his ID, ran it, handed it back. 42nd floor. Check in at reception when you get up there. Thank you. He clipped his visitor badge to his jacket pocket and stepped to the side to retrieve his backpack from the scanner belt. The backpack held his thermos, a battered paperback he was maybe 60 pages into, a granola bar, and a small first aid kit he carried out of habit from a different life. He slung it over one shoulder and looked toward the elevators. That was when he heard the doors. Not the revolving door he'd come through, the side entrance. A set of heavy glass panels on the east wall that were typically used for deliveries or the occasional large group arrival. Those doors didn't open with the polite pneumatic sigh of the main entrance. They banged, both of them, at the same time, hard enough that the sound cut across the lobby like a flat crack, and the 200 people who'd been doing their ordinary morning things all had the same involuntary response. Heads turning, steps slowing, conversations faltering. Ethan was already looking. 4 men came through first. They were not dressed for an office building. Heavy boots, dark clothing, the deliberate kind of looseness in their movements that wasn't carelessness, but something practiced. A way of carrying yourself that communicated availability for violence without announcing it directly. Ethan cataloged all of it in the time it took most people to register that something was off. Then the 5th man came through. Briggs Kane was not large in the way that some men were large. Not the size of a wall, not built to look like something out of a movie poster. He was maybe 6'1", lean, with the kind of face that had been broken and reset enough times that it had stopped bothering to pretend its symmetry. He moved like someone who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to get a room's attention, because rooms simply paid attention when he entered them. He had the quality, Ethan had met a small number of men in his life who possessed it, of someone completely unbothered by consequences. Behind him, two more men. One of them was carrying a duffel bag. The other had his hand resting casually inside his jacket. 7 total. Ethan set his backpack down on a nearby chair. He was doing the math, and the math was not good. 7 men, a lobby with 2 security guards who were already backing toward the desk with their hands up, roughly 200 civilians with nowhere to go fast. The elevators were too slow. The revolving door was already compromised. One of the 4 advance men had positioned himself beside it with his arms crossed. The side entrance they'd come through was Briggs's exit too, which meant it was also a pinch point. The lobby had gone from murmuring to silent in the span of about 4 seconds. "Nobody needs to do anything dramatic," Briggs said, and his voice was calm in a way that was worse than shouting. He spoke at a normal volume, and the entire room heard him because the entire room was holding its breath. "I'm here for one conversation with one person. Rest of you stand where you are." He was scanning the lobby as he said it. Not nervously, professionally, looking for something specific. He found it. Vanessa Whitmore had come in through the main entrance approximately 90 seconds before the side doors opened. Ethan had registered her in the way he registered most things, cataloged, filed, not particularly dwelled upon. 30 years old, sharp suit, the kind of posture that came from either boarding school or sheer force of personal will. She'd been moving through the lobby with the specific efficiency of someone who had a meeting in 11 minutes and had already mentally started it. 2 people were flanking her, trying to hand her things and tell her things simultaneously, and she was absorbing both with a steadiness that suggested she'd had a lot of practice. Briggs walked directly to her. Vanessa turned when she heard the side doors, the same as everyone else. She took in the situation faster than most. Ethan could see the moment her face shifted from confusion to a cold, locked-down composure that was either genuine calm or the best imitation of it he'd ever seen in a civilian. She didn't back away. She stood her ground, which was the wrong thing to do in that particular moment, but Ethan understood the instinct. "Ms. Whitmore," Briggs said. He pulled a folded document from inside his jacket and held it out. "I need your signature." "I don't know who you are," Vanessa said. Her voice was steady. "And I don't know what you think you're doing, but this building has—" Briggs put his hand on her shoulder and shoved. It wasn't a complicated movement. It was exactly what it was, a hard, dismissive push, the kind designed to establish who was in charge of the next 5 minutes. Vanessa went down hard, one knee hitting the marble first, one palm catching her, and for a moment she was on the floor looking up at a man who had just physically removed her from the vertical position in front of 200 of her own employees. The lobby made a sound, not words, just a collective intake of breath, a compression of horror that hung in the air and didn't resolve. Nobody moved. Ethan walked to the reception desk, where a young woman with a headset had gone the color of old chalk. "What's your name?" he asked her quietly. She blinked at him. "Sonia? Sonia, I need you to call 911 right now. Keep your voice low, stay behind the desk, and tell them you have multiple armed intruders in the lobby of this building. Can you do that?" Yes. Yes. Good. Do it now." He set his thermos on the edge of the desk and walked toward the center of the lobby. He was aware, as he moved, that this was the part where most people would have a significant internal argument with themselves. He'd had that argument many times before in his life, and he'd noticed that it always went faster than expected. The argument had a way of resolving itself before the mind fully caught up, the body already moving, the decision already made somewhere below the level of deliberate thought. Briggs had crouched down to Vanessa's level and was showing her the document. 2 of his men stood a few feet back, watching the rest of the lobby. The other 2 were positioned near the desk. The man near the revolving door hadn't moved. "Sign it," Briggs was saying. "It's not complicated. You sign this, your assets transfer. We're done here." "You're insane," Vanessa said. She was still on the floor, but she'd shifted her weight back onto her heels, one hand braced against the marble. She was not crying. She was furious, which struck Ethan as the more dangerous condition, and in this particular moment, also the more useful one. You walked into a corporate headquarters in broad daylight to sign it. No. Briggs straightened up. He glanced at the man near the desk, and something passed between them that wasn't a word. I'd stop there, Ethan said. His voice wasn't loud. He'd learned a long time ago that volume was usually a substitute for something. Certainty, authority, the willingness to do what you said you'd do. When you had those things, you didn't need to raise your voice. Every head in the lobby turned. Briggs turned last, slowly, the way that men do when they're not used to being interrupted. He looked at Ethan for a moment. The worn jacket, the contractor badge, the unremarkable face of a man holding nothing more threatening than a manila envelope. And then something crossed his expression that was almost worse than anger, amusement. Walk away, Briggs said. I'm going to ask you once to let her up off the floor. One of the thugs near the desk laughed. Not cruelly, genuinely, the way you laugh at something that's just actually kind of funny. Another one said something low to the man beside him. Briggs looked at Ethan the way you look at a dog that's wandered into the wrong yard. Patient, slightly bored. Last chance, he said. You walk out that door, nothing happens to you. Ethan set his envelope down on the nearest surface. A low decorative table, the kind with nothing on it but a single architectural plant. He rolled his left shoulder once, the way he always did when that old ligament injury was starting to bark at him. He glanced at the distance between himself and the first man, then the second, then the third. I'm not leaving, he said. What happened next took 11 seconds. Later, when people tried to reconstruct it, and many of them did, in break rooms and parking garages, and on the phone with people who hadn't been there, the difficulty was that it happened too fast for narrative. Surveillance footage would eventually capture all of it, but footage wasn't the same as being present for it, and presence wasn't always sufficient either. Ethan didn't fight the way you expected a fight to look. There was no theatrical wind-up, no dramatic stance, no moment where he paused to demonstrate how serious things were about to get. He just moved. The man near the desk was first because he was closest, and because he'd taken a half step forward when Briggs gave the unspoken signal, and a half step forward was an intention, and intentions required addressing. Ethan's elbow connected with the side of the man's jaw at an angle that canceled most of the force on the joint, precise enough that the man dropped without lasting structural damage. The second was reaching inside his jacket, and Ethan redirected the arm before it completed the motion, using the momentum rather than fighting it, and the man's own forward motion took him into the edge of the desk in a way that put him out of the problem without putting him in the hospital. The third came from Ethan's left, fast, big, the largest of the group. And there was a moment, one actual moment, where Ethan took a hit on the ear that lit up the left side of his head and made the lobby briefly very bright. He didn't stop. Getting hit was information. He adjusted. The large man went down using his own committed weight against him. The fourth and fifth were watching now, and watching meant hesitating. And hesitating in a fight is a specific kind of problem because it means you've started calculating, and calculation is slower than reaction. Ethan was already inside the distance before either of them resolved their calculation. 11 seconds. The man near the revolving door had backed into it, out onto the sidewalk. Ethan let him go. Briggs stood in the center of the lobby, the document still in his hand, and looked at the 5 men on the floor with the expression of someone processing information that didn't fit any of their existing categories. Ethan's ear was ringing. His left hand had a cut on the knuckle from somewhere in the previous 30 seconds. He didn't know when. He stood maybe 8 feet from Briggs and waited. The lobby was silent in a different way now, not the silence of held breath. The silence of people who have just watched something they don't have words for. Vanessa Whitmore had gotten to her feet. She was standing slightly to Ethan's left, her palms still red from catching her weight on the marble, her jacket pulled crooked, her composure doing something complicated, trying to reassemble itself over the top of a genuine shock that kept disrupting the process. She was looking at Ethan, not at Briggs, not at the men on the floor, at Ethan. He didn't look back. He was watching Briggs, who hadn't moved, and whose face had gone through the amusement and the processing and had arrived somewhere harder and colder. Who are you? Briggs said. Someone who has to pick up his daughter at 3, Ethan said. Put the document down. Briggs was still calculating. Ethan could see it. The mapping of exits. The counting of remaining resources. The very rapid and apparently unsatisfying arithmetic of the situation he now found himself in. The man near the revolving door was gone. 5 were down. His own position relative to the exits was not ideal. He folded the document slowly and put it back inside his jacket. We'll talk again, he said. It wasn't a threat exactly. It was a man committing to a future conversation in a tone that wasn't friendly. Ethan took 1 step to the left, clearing the path to the side entrance. Briggs walked out. The lobby stayed quiet for another 3 seconds after the doors swung shut. Then it exhaled. All of it. 200 people. The same breath. And the sound of it was almost like wind. Sonia, from behind the reception desk, said, "They're coming. They said 10 minutes. Good, Ethan said. He went back to the decorative table and picked up his manila envelope. His ear was still ringing. His knuckle had stopped bleeding, but it needed cleaning. He looked at the clip on his visitor badge and made sure it was still properly attached. Are you okay? He turned. Vanessa Whitmore was standing 2 feet away, and up close her composure was showing its seams. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were moving across his face in the rapid, specific way of someone performing an assessment they hadn't been trained to perform and didn't have a framework for. Fine, he said. You? My knee hurts. He looked down. There was a long scrape across her palm, and the knee of her trousers had a tear in it. Small things, both of them. The kind of things that didn't show up until the adrenaline started coming down. Sit down before that hits you, he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she sat down on the low decorative bench beside the architectural plant, the kind of bench that existed in lobbies for aesthetic purposes and wasn't really meant for sitting, and pressed her scraped palm against her knee and breathed. You're the maintenance contractor, she said. Engineering documents, he said. 42nd floor. She stared at him. She stopped, started again. You took down 5 men in about 10 seconds. 11, he said. Then, because that was a strange thing to correct. Give or take. Somewhere in the middle distance, a siren had started. Growing. Vanessa looked at the door Briggs had walked out of. The men on the floor were making various sounds now. Groaning, shifting, beginning the slow process of returning to consciousness, none of them badly hurt. Outside, through the glass, the first police vehicle was pulling to the curb. She looked back at Ethan. What's your name? Grayson. Ethan Grayson. Who are you, Ethan Grayson? He considered the question for a moment. It was the kind of question that had more than one honest answer, depending on which part of the answer you were looking for. He was a contractor. He was a father. He was a man who had spent a very long time trying to be neither of those things, while also being the other thing, the thing that had walked him across a lobby toward a gang of armed men without a second of real hesitation, and had discovered that you didn't stop being any one thing just because you decided to. I'm late for a delivery, he said, and he held up his manila envelope and looked toward the elevators. The elevators were still working. That was the first thing the building manager confirmed when he came sprinting across the lobby about 4 minutes after Briggs walked out. A heavy-set man in his mid-50s named Gerald, who had the look of someone who'd spent 20 years preparing for a crisis and was now discovering that preparation and readiness were not the same thing. He kept looking at the men on the floor, then at Ethan, then back at the men on the floor, and his mouth kept opening and closing without producing sentences. Sir, Ethan said, the elevators. Yes, they're operational. We didn't go into full lockdown. The system requires a manual. Gerald stopped. Who authorized? Nobody authorized anything, Ethan said. Are your stairwells clear? I think so. You need to know, not think. Gerald got on his radio. The police had come through the main entrance by then. 4 officers first, then 6 more. And within the next few minutes, a detective in plainclothes who identified herself as Rains and immediately began the process of establishing order in a lobby that had 200 rattled people, 5 men on the floor in various states of consciousness, and 1 contractor who was standing near the reception desk with a manila envelope and a cut on his knuckle. Detective Rains looked at Ethan for a long moment when someone pointed him out to her. You're the one who... Yes? Were you armed? No. She looked at his hands, at the knuckle, at the men behind him. I'm going to need you to stay, she said. I have a delivery on 42, he said, and I need to be done by 2:30. She gave him a look that said she'd heard stranger things today and was not going to be making promises. Stay, she said again, and went to crouch beside the nearest man on the floor, who was sitting up now and pressing his hand against his jaw with the sullen, inward-focused expression of someone cataloging a new and unwelcome understanding of his own limitations. Vanessa was still on the bench. She'd straightened her jacket, which helped her look composed, except that it didn't, because the tear in her trousers was still there, and her palm was still scraped and her hair had come loose on one side in a way that she either hadn't noticed or had decided not to address. She was on her phone, voice low and steady, telling whoever was on the other end that the board meeting needed to be pushed, and that yes, she was fine, and no, she didn't need anyone to come down to the lobby. Ethan sat down in the nearest chair, the kind of low modern chair that was also mostly aesthetic and not really built for sitting in, but it held his weight, and waited. His ear had stopped ringing, mostly. The knuckle wasn't bad. He'd had worse from a bad afternoon with a wrench in a tight equipment bay. He flexed his left hand once, twice, and thought about his daughter's school schedule and what the traffic on the 42 bus would look like at 2:15 on a Tuesday, and whether the granola bar in his backpack was the peanut butter kind or the honey oat, because he couldn't remember which one he'd grabbed that morning, and it mattered to him more than it should have. Mr. Grayson? He looked up. Vanessa had put the phone away. She was standing in front of him with her arms crossed. Not closed off, but the way people cross their arms when they're cold or when they're holding themselves together without wanting to make it obvious. You need something for that hand, she said. He looked at his knuckle. It's fine. There's a first aid kit in the security office. I have one. He tilted his head toward his backpack. I'll clean it up before I go upstairs. She sat down in this chair across from him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Around them, the lobby was doing the complicated thing that spaces do in the aftermath of violence, trying to return to itself while the evidence of what had happened was still visible in it. Officers were marking positions. Someone had set up a perimeter around the men on the floor. The receptionist, Sonia, was giving a statement to a young officer who was writing everything down in a small notebook. Gerald, the building manager, was on his radio again, this time with more confidence. You should have left, Vanessa said, when he told you to. Probably. Most people would have. Most people did, he said, without judgment. It was a fact. 200 people had been in this lobby, and all but one of them had made the sensible choice. Vanessa looked at him with an expression that was trying to be several things at once, grateful and uncomfortable, and something else underneath both of those that she hadn't gotten around to naming yet. Why didn't you? He thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was that there wasn't really a why, not in the way people usually meant when they asked that question. There was no moment of decision that he could point to and say, this is where I chose. The moment Briggs pushed her down, something in Ethan's body had simply begun its calculation, and by the time his conscious mind caught up, he was already setting down the envelope. It needed doing, he said. She waited for more. When it didn't come, she pressed her lips together in a way that suggested she found that answer insufficient, but had decided not to say so directly. You've done that before, she said instead. What you did. That wasn't instinct. That was training. He didn't confirm or deny. Military, she said. He picked up his backpack and unzipped the front pocket, took out the small first aid kit. It was a flat orange case, the kind you could get at any pharmacy. But someone who looked carefully would have noticed it was stocked with more precision than the standard contents. Specific gauze sizes, proper antiseptic, a small roll of medical tape. He cleaned the knuckle, taped it, put the kit back. Vanessa watched all of this. Navy, he said finally. I got out 4 years ago. What did you do? In the Navy. My job. She looked at him for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, something in her face shifted. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it, the kind of involuntary expression that happens when you recognize a familiar pattern. You're one of those people, she said. What people? The ones who answer questions without answering questions. He zipped the kit back into his bag. I answered the question. You said you did your job. That's not an answer, that's a category. He looked at her. She had the direct gaze of someone who spent a lot of time in rooms where the person who blinked first lost something. He'd known people like that, officers mostly, and intelligence liaisons, and one particular logistics commander who could make a room full of special operations personnel feel like they were being evaluated by a principal. It was a specific skill that not everyone developed and that could not really be faked. SEAL, he said. 12 years. She was quiet for a beat. Okay, she said, which was, he thought, the right response. Not the dramatic version, not the wide eyes and the "you were a Navy SEAL," but just the absorbing of a fact and the adjustment of understanding that followed it. Okay, she said again, quieter, and looked at the side entrance where Briggs had walked out. Detective Rains came back to them 20 minutes later with a recorder and a notepad and the kind of focused calm that suggested she'd done a lot of post-incident interviews and had stopped finding them either easy or particularly hard. She took Ethan's account first, and he gave it in the linear, precise way he'd given mission debriefs. What he observed, what he assessed, what he did, in that order, without editorial. Rains kept glancing up from her notepad while he talked, the way people do when they're not sure the words and the speaker quite match. You said you counted 7, she said, from the moment they entered. 7. 4 advanced Briggs, 1 with a bag, 1 with his hand inside his jacket. The one near the revolving door exited voluntarily before I engaged. The bag, I don't know what was in it. I didn't get to it. You'll want to find that. Rains made a note. The one who left. Young, maybe 22. He made a decision pretty fast when things changed. I don't think he knew what he was walking into. That's helpful, she said, and she sounded like she meant it. Mr. Grayson, I have your contact information from the contractor badge. We're going to need a full written statement, and we may need to bring you in for a follow-up. That's fine. Is there anything else you want to tell me that I haven't asked about? He thought about that seriously, the way she'd intended the question. Not a formality, but an actual opening. The document, he said. Briggs had a document he wanted Ms. Whitmore to sign. He put it back in his jacket when he left. You'll want that when you pick him up. Whatever's in it, that's the actual reason he was here. Rains wrote that down. Then she nodded once and moved to Vanessa. Ethan finally made it to the 42nd floor at 10:30. The elevator was fast and quiet, and had the kind of mirrored interior that Ethan had always found mildly absurd. He looked at himself in it while the floors counted up and saw what he always saw. A man of average height, average build, with dark circles and a contractor badge and a piece of medical tape on his knuckle. He looked, if he was being honest, like someone who'd had a hard morning. The facilities manager on 42 was a brisk woman named Paulette, who shook his hand, took the envelope, scanned the contract number, and signed his delivery confirmation without once asking why he was 43 minutes late or what had happened in the lobby, because she had apparently already heard from 5 different people what had happened in the lobby and had the specific attitude of someone who had processed the information and moved on. You need anything? She asked. Coffee? We've got a machine down the hall. I'm okay, he said. You sure? Because you've got... She gestured at his ear. He reached up and touched it, found dried blood on the outer edge. He'd taken a hit earlier in the fight that he'd filed under acceptable and then forgotten about. He must have caught the edge of something. I'm sure, he said. Thank you. He signed his copy, collected his forms, and took the elevator back down. The lobby had changed while he was upstairs. The 5 men had been taken out, into custody, presumably, or to be evaluated by paramedics, he didn't know which. The police presence was still significant, but had reorganized itself into a more settled pattern. A few officers at the entrance, crime scene tape around the area where the altercation had occurred. A technician with a camera working the floor where Vanessa had gone down. Gerald, the building manager, was giving someone a tour of the security footage setup with the energy of a man who had found his purpose. Sonia was back at the reception desk. She looked up when Ethan stepped off the elevator, and she gave him the kind of look that people give when they're trying to express something that doesn't have a comfortable verbal form. Thank you, she said. I mean it. You made the call, he said. That's what mattered. She shook her head slightly, like she disagreed but didn't want to argue. He collected his thermos from the corner of the desk where he'd left it, checked that the lid was still on, and headed for the exit. "Mr. Grayson?" He stopped. Vanessa was standing near the main entrance. She'd fixed her hair. The jacket had been straightened. The only remaining evidence of the morning was the tear in her trousers, which she'd apparently decided was beneath her attention, and the particular quality of alertness in her eyes that hadn't been there when he first saw her walking across the lobby. She was holding 2 cups of coffee, the good kind, from the cafe on the lobby's east side, paper cups with cardboard sleeves. She held one out to him. He took it. "I should get going. Your bus doesn't run until 11 on Tuesdays, the 42. He looked at her. "I checked," she said, without apology. "Sit down for 10 minutes. He looked at the coffee. He looked at the bench she was moving toward. He did the math on his morning. Delivery done, statement given, no reason to be here except the thing he was standing next to, and sat down. She sat beside him, close enough for conversation, not so close as to be crowded. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the lobby around them, the slowly normalizing activity, the yellow tape, the officers, the building trying to figure out what to do with the shape of the last 2 hours. "I've been running Crownstone for 3 years," she said. "I've dealt with hostile board members and competitors who play dirty, and one attempted regulatory sabotage that cost me 6 months and more legal fees than I want to think about." She paused. "Nobody has ever walked into my building and physically put me on the floor. No. It's a strange feeling." She was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking I should be more, I don't know, upset or shaken, but what I actually feel is angry, which is probably not healthy." "Angry's fine," Ethan said. "My therapist would probably say it's avoidance." "Your therapist isn't here." She turned her head and looked at him, and for the first time since they'd sat down together, there was something that was genuinely close to a laugh in her expression, brief and a little surprised. "No," she said. "She's not." He drank his coffee. It was better than the thermos version he'd started the morning with, which had been lukewarm since about 8:15. "Can I ask you something?" Vanessa said. "You can ask." "Your daughter, you mentioned her, sir, when you were talking to Briggs. You said you had to pick her up at 3. "I do." "How old is she?" 7. He thought about her for a moment, the way she packed her backpack the night before, and lined up her shoes by the door, and left him notes on the refrigerator in her handwriting that was still working out the relationship between letters and the spaces between them. "She's in 2nd grade. "What's her name?" "Macy." Vanessa held that. "You said that to him on purpose," she said slowly. "The 3 o'clock. You weren't telling him you were in a hurry. You were telling him you had a reason." He hadn't thought of it exactly that way, but he didn't disagree. "Briggs would have understood that," she said. "A man with something to go home to. That's a different kind of threat than someone with nothing to lose." She studied the side of his face. "That was very deliberate." "It worked," he said. She turned back to her coffee. Around them, the lobby was getting louder again, slowly reclaiming its ordinary frequency. Bones, footsteps, the specific ambient sound of an institution resuming itself. "He's not going to stop," Vanessa said. Her voice had changed. The brief warmth of the last few minutes had pulled back, and what was underneath was the same cool, steady register she'd used when Briggs put the document in her face. Whatever he came here to get, he didn't get it, and whatever reason he had for wanting it, that reason didn't walk out with the police. Ethan had been thinking about this since about 30 seconds after Briggs left the building. He'd been thinking about the document, and the 7 men, and the specificity of the target, not random, not opportunistic, a pre-selected CEO, a pre-prepared document, an operation designed around getting a signature rather than getting out with cash or assets. That level of preparation meant backing. Resources. Someone who had provided both the plan and the means. Briggs was a weapon, which meant someone was holding him. "Someone hired him," Ethan said. "I know. You have any idea who?" She didn't answer immediately. She turned her cup in her hands, a slow rotation, and looked at the lobby floor. Then she said, "I have suspicions. I've had them for a while. And I don't have proof. And in this business, suspicion without proof is just a story you tell yourself while someone else builds a case against you." She looked at him. The document he wanted me to sign. It was an asset transfer agreement. I could see the header before he put it in my face. Specifically, it was structured as an emergency disposition clause. Ethan's understanding of corporate documents was limited, but he knew what a disposition clause meant in practice. That's for situations where a CEO is incapacitated, he said, or signs voluntarily under duress, she said, which they were betting on. A pause. Someone inside this company helped draft that language. That's not a document you commission from a stranger. You need access to internal legal structures to write it correctly. He looked at her. You know who. I have a name in my head, she said carefully. I've had it there for about 6 weeks, but I haven't been able to. She stopped. There are things moving in this company right now that don't quite fit. Small things. Authorization patterns, access logs, a research file that got queried 3 times last month by someone who had no operational reason to query it. What's in the research file? The company's next-generation materials patent, pre-disclosure, worth approximately $400 million to whoever owns it when it's ready to go public. She said it flatly, without the emphasis that number might have warranted, the way people talk about quantities that are large enough to be abstract. If the company transfers its key assets under duress and the controlling interest shifts, whoever orchestrated that controls the patent. Ethan turned this over. The attack in the lobby had felt tactical to him. He'd read it as tactical in real time, which was part of why he'd let Briggs go rather than trying to hold him. A tactical operation with this level of preparation didn't end with a failed first attempt. It regrouped, reassessed, and tried something else. He looked at his watch. It was 11:08. You have a board meeting, he said. I have a board meeting at 2, she said. They pushed it from 10:30. Who knows the new time? She looked at him. If the attack was meant to happen before the meeting, he said, and the meeting's still happening today, then whoever planned this knows the schedule moved, which means they have eyes on your calendar, inside. The lobby noise kept going around them. Neither of them moved. Vanessa pulled out her phone and opened something on it. He caught a glimpse of a calendar interface, multiple layers, overlapping blocks of color. She scrolled. Her expression didn't change, but something in her jaw did. The calendar update went to 14 people, she said quietly. How many of those 14 are in this building right now? She didn't answer. She was already typing. Ethan looked at his watch again, not because of the time, but because looking at his watch was a way of grounding himself in the physical. And the physical was where he was most useful. He thought about the service corridors he'd noticed on his way to the elevators. The building's footprint, the ratio of security staff currently occupied with the lobby incident versus the rest of the building's 40 floors. He thought about a man with a duffel bag who had entered this lobby and whose bag he had never seen again. Vanessa, he said. She looked up from her phone. Where's your server room? She went still. 23rd floor. Why? The man who came in with Briggs, he was carrying a duffel bag. I didn't engage him because he was positioned toward the rear, and I was managing the immediate threat. He paused. I never saw him leave. She was already on her feet. The cameras, she said. Security has been managing a lobby incident for the last 2 hours, he said. How many people are actually monitoring the feeds right now versus responding? Her hand was on her phone. She was dialing. When someone answered, she said, pull every camera between the lobby and 23 right now. Last 2 hours. I need eyes on a man with a black duffel bag. He came in with the group that hit the lobby, and I need to know where he went. She was moving toward the security desk as she spoke, and Ethan was 2 steps behind her, and the building, which had been slowly convincing itself that the worst was over, had no idea yet that the worst had not even started. The security office was a room off the south corridor that smelled like coffee and stressed electronics, with a bank of monitors covering what looked like 60 or 70 camera feeds cycling on a 4-screen display. 2 officers were in there, the building's own security staff, not police, and both of them had the look of people who had been running on emergency adrenaline since 8:47 and were beginning to feel the debt coming due. Playback, Vanessa said. Now, camera group C. That covers the East Corridor access points, right? Yes, ma'am. The closer officer, young, name badge reading Torres, pulled up the group and ran it back. They watched in silence. The timestamp read 8:49 when the 4 advance men entered the lobby. The main feed showed the sequence exactly as Ethan remembered it. The doors, the positioning, the deliberate spread of Briggs's group. The duffel bag was on the left shoulder of a man who peeled away from the group almost immediately, before Briggs had even crossed the floor to Vanessa. He walked casually, not running, not sneaking, moving with the practiced, ordinary-looking pace of someone who had been told exactly where to go and how to get there without attracting notice. He turned left at the east corridor. C7, Torres said, and switched feeds. The man walked to the stairwell. Stairwell camera, Ethan said. Torres pulled it up. The man took the stairs up. They watched him go. Floor 4, floor 8, floor 11, floor 15, until the stairwell feed jumped to 23 and the man pushed through the door. 23, Torres said quietly. Server room, Vanessa said. Get me the 23 hallway. The hallway camera showed the man walking directly, without hesitation, to the server room door. He had a key card. He used it. The door opened. Vanessa said something under her breath that was not for anyone else. That card, Ethan said to Torres. What authorization level does it need to access that room? Executive Ops or IT Director, Torres said. One of maybe 6 people in the company. Vanessa was on her phone again. I need you to tell me right now if the server room on 23 has had any access in the last 2 hours. She listened. Yes. I know about the badge entry on the hallway camera. I'm asking you whether anything has been connected to the intake port on the secondary rack. A pause. Don't touch anything. Don't let anyone in or out of that room. She ended the call. He's still in there, she said, or whatever he plugged in is still in there. Ethan had already thought about what that meant. A device plugged into a server rack in a data room wasn't just stealing, it was an extraction that could be ongoing or a planted access point, or both. Physical access to a server when you already had a keycard meant you didn't need to hack in remotely. You just needed enough time. The police need to know, he said. Yes, she said, and I need to get to 23 before whoever is still in that room decides to leave. She looked at Ethan. You don't have to. I know, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once and turned to Torres. Tell Detective Rains we have an active situation on 23. Tell her we're moving. Ma'am, you shouldn't. Tell her now, Vanessa said, and walked out of the security office. Ethan followed her into the south corridor toward the elevators and thought briefly about Macy's school schedule and the 2:15 bus and the granola bar in his backpack. And then he put all of it in a compartment and closed it, the way he'd always been able to close things, and focused on the problem in front of him, which was a man in a server room with a duffel bag and a stolen key card, and enough time to have already done whatever he came here to do. The elevator came. They got in. The doors closed. Floor 23. Vanessa was looking straight ahead at the mirrored interior. Her reflection looked back at her, composed and slightly pale, jacket straight, torn trouser knee, the only evidence of a morning that had started 11 seconds at a time. The name in your head, Ethan said. She glanced at him in the mirror. You said you had a name, he said. For 6 weeks. She was quiet for the count of 3 floors. Gavin Holloway, she said. My COO. The elevator reached 23 and the doors opened onto a quiet hallway that smelled of recycled air and faintly of something electrical. And somewhere at the end of it, behind a closed door with a keycard lock, a man with a duffel bag was still doing the work that a lobby full of violence had been designed to cover. The hallway on 23 was the kind of quiet that only exists deep inside large buildings. Not peaceful quiet, but the absence of human activity in a space designed around it. Fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency just below perception. The carpet was the standard corporate gray that showed nothing and said nothing. Somewhere behind a wall, server cooling fans ran at a constant pitch that sounded, if you listened long enough, almost like breathing. Vanessa walked fast, but not running, and Ethan stayed half a step behind and to her left, which put him between her and the corridor intersections. She noticed this and didn't say anything about it. How many people have offices on this floor? He asked, voice low. 6. IT infrastructure team. They'd all be down on 1 right now. We have an all-hands protocol when there's a security incident in the lobby. So the floor should be empty. Should be. That qualifier was doing a lot of work. The server room was at the end of the hall, a heavy door with a keycard reader mounted at shoulder height and a small indicator light that was currently green. Green meant the door was secured from the outside, but had been accessed recently. Ethan knew enough about physical security infrastructure to know that green was not the reassurance it looked like. Vanessa had her own keycard out. She stopped 3 feet from the door. "My IT director said nothing's been disconnected," she said quietly. "Whatever he plugged in is still running." "How long has he been in there?" She checked her phone. Camera timestamp puts him entering at 8:53. It's 11:22 now. 2.5 hours. That was a long time to run a data extraction. Either the file was enormous, or the device was doing something more complex than a straight copy, or the man inside had been waiting for a signal that hadn't come, because the signal was supposed to be Vanessa's signature on a document, and that hadn't happened. "He might not know the lobby operation failed," Ethan said. Vanessa looked at him. "No phone use in the server room," he said. "Standard security protocol. Most companies restrict cellular in there because of interference in data policy. If he went dark the moment he badged in, he's been operating on the assumption that Briggs completed his end." She processed this. "So he's still in there running the extraction because he thinks the company already transferred. And he's waiting to walk out with a clean exit, probably timed to coincide with the chaos of the lobby, except the chaos is over and he doesn't know it yet." She looked at the door, then at Ethan. "If we go in there, he's not going to be happy about it. He could be armed." "He could be," Ethan agreed. "Stay behind me when the door opens. If he moves toward you, get back in the hallway and let the door close. Don't argue with me about that part." She looked like she wanted to argue about it preemptively. She didn't. "The police are coming," she said. "Yes, but if that device finishes its transfer before they get here, it doesn't matter that he's in custody. The data is already gone." He looked at the door. "What's the device most likely connected to?" "The secondary intake rack is where our R&D partition lives. The patent files, the material composition data, the testing results. Everything that makes the patent worth $400 million is in that partition." "Is there a way to kill power to that rack without going into the room?" "There's a circuit breaker panel in the utility closet at the end of the hall, but cutting power to the rack without a proper shutdown sequence could corrupt the data." "Your data or his extraction?" She stopped. "Both," she said slowly. "But his more than mine. Our systems have redundant backups on an isolated network. His device is pulling a live copy. If the transfer is interrupted midstream, what he gets is fragmented and unusable." Ethan looked back down the corridor toward the utility closet, then at the server room door. Then he did what he always did when he had two options and limited time. He picked the one that removed the problem without requiring him to stand in a doorway. "Utility closet," he said. "Show me." The closet was unlocked, which was either a facility management oversight or a deliberate choice by someone who'd planned ahead. Ethan didn't touch the handle with his bare hand. He used the sleeve of his jacket because Torres in the security office had his contractor prints on file, and he didn't want anyone spending time later sorting through contact points that didn't matter. Inside, breaker panel, labeled in small typed font on a laminated sheet that was slightly yellowed at the edges. Vanessa ran her finger down the labels without touching them. "Secondary server rack B," she said. "That's this one." She looked at him. He nodded. She threw the breaker. The hallway didn't change. The server room had its own internal lighting on a separate circuit, but through the door came a new sound, or rather an absence of one, the specific silence of a machine stopping that had been running continuously. They went back to the server room door. Ethan held out his hand for her key card. She gave it to him without asking why, which he appreciated. He positioned himself to the left of the door frame, the hinge side, not the opening side, and ran the card. The lock clicked. He pushed the door open with his foot, staying out of the threshold. Silence from inside. Then, "What the—" A man's voice, young or youngish, mid-30s maybe, controlled but surprised, which meant he'd been focused on the device and the door had startled him. "Building maintenance," Ethan said from outside the frame. "We've got a power fault on the secondary rack, need to pull the affected hardware." A pause. "Nobody told me about maintenance access." "Nobody tells IT about maintenance access until the UPS starts throwing error codes. You want to step away from the rack, sir? Just need to get to the back panel." Another pause. Longer. The man was thinking. Ethan was counting. Not seconds, but the rhythm of a person recalibrating. He'd done this in other contexts, in other hallways, outside other doors, and the cadence of a person deciding whether they were caught was recognizable across a surprising range of circumstances. The pause ended with footsteps. The man came toward the door. He was 34 or 35, medium build, wearing a visitor badge that Ethan clocked as a forgery within half a second. The wrong laminate thickness, the logo color slightly off from the badges he'd seen downstairs. Dark jacket, dark trousers, the duffel bag on his shoulder. His face had the look of someone who was very good at appearing calm and was currently working harder than usual to maintain it. He saw Ethan and stopped. He saw Vanessa and his face did something complicated and fast. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and the remaining performance collapsed entirely. "Step out of the room," Vanessa said. Her voice was the coldest Ethan had heard it, which was notable given the morning she'd had. The man took a half step back instead. His hand went to the bag strap. Ethan moved into the doorway. "Don't," he said. The man looked at him. Really looked. The way people look when they're reassessing a situation they thought they'd mapped. He'd seen the lobby probably never, had no direct knowledge of what Ethan had done downstairs, but something in the way Ethan occupied the doorframe, the stillness of it, the complete absence of performance, communicated enough. The hand came away from the strap. "Bag on the floor," Ethan said. The bag went on the floor. "Kick it toward me." It slid across the floor. Ethan stopped it with his foot without looking down, keeping his eyes on the man. "What's your name?" Vanessa asked. The man said nothing. "It doesn't matter," Ethan said to her. "He's got the badge. Rains will pull it." Vanessa had her phone out and was already talking. Rains, Ethan assumed, or Torres, or both. She gave the floor and the room number and said they had the individual contained and needed officers now. She said it with the flat efficiency of someone who had made enough high-stakes calls that adding one more to the morning didn't require a breath. They held the man in the server room doorway until the elevator at the end of the hall opened and two officers came through at a pace that suggested they'd been briefed in transit. Ethan stepped aside. The man was walked to the elevator with his hands behind his back and the expression of someone performing the internal arithmetic of how bad things had gotten. The duffel bag went with the officers. Vanessa stood in the server room doorway and looked at the secondary rack. The device was still plugged in, a small black rectangle, maybe the size of a large thumb drive but denser, with an indicator light that had gone dark when the power cut. She didn't touch it. She looked at it for a long time. "He was 40 minutes away from a complete extraction," she said. "My IT director's estimate." 40 minutes, Ethan said, if the lobby had gone the way they planned it. She stopped. "I'd have been signing that document. Security would have been managing the transfer chaos. He walks out with the partition data, and by the time we figure out what happened, whoever's on the other end of that device has the entire patent in a jurisdiction where we can't touch it." She turned away from the rack and looked at Ethan. She looked tired for the first time. Not the composed weariness of someone managing a long day, but the specific exhaustion of a person who has just fully understood how close something was. "Gavin was the only person who could have gotten him that key card," she said. "Executive Ops access. 6 people. I can account for 4 of them. They've been in depositions in Chicago since Monday. The 5th is me." A pause. "The 6th is Gavin." Ethan leaned against the wall across from the rack and crossed his arms. "Where is he now?" "His calendar says he's been in the executive conference room on 38 since 9:50. Private strategic review. He scheduled it himself 2 weeks ago." She said this with a particular flatness. A meeting with no other attendees in a room with no camera coverage during the exact window when the lobby operation was supposed to run. So he's been sitting up there waiting for confirmation that the transfer went through, waiting to walk into the board meeting at 2 o'clock with a done deal. She pulled her jacket straight. "He doesn't know yet." Ethan looked at her. "What do you want to do?" "I want to go up to 38, she said, "and I want to look him in the face." He considered pointing out that this was not strictly the recommended procedure, that the recommended procedure involved Detective Rains in a formal interview room and lawyers on several sides of a table. He also considered that Vanessa Whitmore had been pushed to the floor of her own lobby 3 hours ago by a man hired by someone she had trusted, and that the distance between what was recommended and what was human was sometimes a gap that deserved acknowledgement. "Rains needs to be there," he said. "I know." "Not after, when you walk in." She nodded. "I'll call her on the way up." They took the elevator to 38. Vanessa called Rains in transit and explained the situation in clipped, precise sentences. Rains said she'd be there in 4 minutes and that they should wait in the corridor. Vanessa said yes without any particular commitment to it, and when the elevator opened on 38, she walked directly to the conference room without pausing. Ethan stayed with her. The conference room had a glass panel beside the door, a narrow strip of window, the kind designed to let people see whether a room was occupied before knocking. Through it, a long table, chairs, a whiteboard with nothing on it, and Gavin Holloway sitting at the far end with a laptop and a phone face up on the table in front of him, looking at neither of them. He was 51 or 52, the kind of gray-haired executive who had been photographed enough times for annual reports and press releases that he developed a resting expression optimized for photography, composed, authoritative, the chin at exactly the right angle. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Ethan's truck, or would have, when the truck was operational. He had a coffee cup at his elbow that was still steaming. He hadn't heard them in the corridor. "How long have you known?" Ethan asked quietly. 6 weeks on the access logs, Vanessa said. But there were other things before that. A board vote 8 months ago that went differently than it should have. 2 members who'd been solid changed their positions overnight with no explanation. A vendor contract that got routed around my authorization. Small things. She paused. Small enough that I told myself I was being paranoid. You weren't. No. She was quiet for a moment. He's been with this company for 9 years. He was here before I was. When I took the CEO position, he backed me publicly in front of the board. He was the first one to shake my hand. A pause. I think that's what he's most angry about, honestly. That it worked for 3 years and then I started catching up to what he was doing. What changed 6 weeks ago? I restructured the research division, moved the patent oversight directly to my office out of COO jurisdiction. He would have known at that point that the window was closing. Once the patent files were under my direct supervision, the access trail would be too visible. She looked through the glass at Holloway. So he accelerated. The elevator at the end of the corridor opened and Detective Rains came through with a second detective Ethan hadn't seen before and 2 officers. Rains looked at Vanessa, then at the conference room door, then at Ethan. You didn't wait, she said. We're in the corridor, Vanessa said. Rains looked at the glass panel through which Holloway was still visible, still unaware. All right, she said. Ms. Whitmore, I need you to stay out here. He's my COO. He's a suspect in a coordinated criminal operation that included an armed assault this morning. You stay out here. Rains looked at Ethan. You too. Ethan held up both hands, which he meant to indicate he had no objections, and which Rains received with a nod. She went to the conference room door and opened it. Holloway looked up from his laptop with the expression of a man who expected an assistant and received something else entirely. He took in Rains, her badge, the second detective, the 2 officers in the doorway, and the sequence of adjustments that crossed his face was fast, but not fast enough. Gavin Holloway? Rains said. Yes. His voice was perfectly steady. Ethan had to give him that. I'm Detective Rains. I need to ask you some questions about the events in the lobby of this building this morning. Of course. Holloway closed his laptop. I heard about the incident. Terrible thing. I've been up here reviewing strategic documents. I wanted to stay out of the way while your people handled the situation downstairs. Rains said. Is Vanessa all right? Ms. Whitmore, I heard she was involved. She's fine. Mr. Holloway, can you tell me when you last accessed the server room on the 23rd floor? A beat. Barely perceptible, but Ethan, standing in the corridor with his arms at his sides, caught it. The server room? Holloway said. It's been some time. Weeks, maybe. I don't have regular reason to access it directly. When did you last use your executive keycard? This morning, to access this floor. Not prior to that? Not at any point before 9:15? Holloway looked at Rains with the patient expression of a man who had sat across from lawyers and regulators and hostile board members and knew what a loaded question looked like. Detective, I've been in this building since 8:30. I went directly to my office, had a brief conversation with my assistant, and came up here at 9:15 as my calendar reflects. If there's a specific, your executive keycard was used this morning to access the server room on 23, Rains said, at 8:53, while you were, by your account, in your office. Silence. Holloway looked down at the table. It was a brief look, the kind that happens before the mind has fully decided on its next move. Someone must have used a duplicate, he said. Cards in this system don't duplicate, Rains said. They're tokenized individually. She tilted her head. Mr. Holloway, we have a man in custody who accessed that server room with your card this morning. We have a device that was plugged into your company's research partition for approximately 2.5 hours, and we have camera footage of that individual entering this building with a group of men who assaulted Miss Whitmore in the lobby. She paused. I'd like to understand how your card ended up in his possession. What happened next surprised Ethan, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. Holloway didn't argue. He didn't escalate into indignation. He sat back in his chair, and something in his face settled, not into calm, but into a kind of resignation that looked almost like relief, which was the particular expression of a person who has been holding something for a long time and has just been given permission to put it down. He looked at the table. I'd like to speak with my attorney, he said. That's your right, Rains said. I'll wait for my attorney before I say anything further. That's fine, Rains nodded to one of the officers. Mr. Holloway, I'm going to ask you to come with us. In the corridor, Vanessa watched through the glass as Holloway stood, buttoned his jacket with the automatic gesture of a man who had done it 10,000 times before, and walked toward the door. He hadn't looked toward the glass, or if he had, Ethan couldn't tell. His face was the annual report face again. Composed, the chin at the right angle, the posture of someone determined to look like what was happening to someone else. The door opened. Holloway came into the corridor with Rains and the officers around him, and for one moment he and Vanessa were in the same 10 feet of space, looking at each other. She didn't say anything, neither did he, but something passed between them in that silence, the specific weight of 9 years and two people who had been, in some functional professional sense, a team, and the strange grief of discovering that one of them had been playing a different game the entire time. It wasn't warm. It wasn't forgiving. But it was honest, which was more than most things that morning had been. Holloway walked to the elevator. Vanessa turned away before the doors closed. She stood in the corridor with her back to the elevator bank and her hands at her sides, and breathed. Just breathed for a few seconds. The way you breathe when you've been managing something very large and you've just been given a 30-second window to be a person before you have to manage the next thing. Ethan stood nearby and didn't try to fill the silence. The board meeting, she said finally. Still at 2? It has to be. She looked at her phone. 12:07. I have less than 2 hours and I have to brief the remaining board members, work with legal, talk to communications, and figure out what we tell the employees about this morning. She put the phone in her pocket. And somewhere in there I should probably eat something because I haven't since 7:15. Lobby cafe is still open, Ethan said. I walked past it on the way out. She looked at him. How is that the most useful thing anyone said to me today? You asked. She started walking toward the elevator, and he fell into step beside her, and they rode back down to the lobby in a silence that was different from the elevator silences before it, not loaded with urgency or incomplete information, but the quieter silence of two people who have been through enough together in a short span of time that the usual requirements of conversation had temporarily suspended themselves. The lobby was still processing itself. The crime scene tape was still up. Officers were still present, though in smaller numbers. The floor where Vanessa had gone down was marked with small plastic evidence tags. The decorative bench they'd sat on, the impractical lobby bench, was visible from the elevator bank, and Ethan looked at it briefly before looking away. There's something I need to tell Detective Rains, Vanessa said, as they stepped off the elevator. About the board members who changed their votes 8 months ago. The ones from the vote you mentioned upstairs. I think Gavin got to them. I don't know how, financial incentive maybe, or something else, but if he was willing to do all of this, she gestured at the lobby. He was willing to do that too. She paused. I should have pushed harder 6 weeks ago. You were gathering information, he said. I was being careful, she said. There's a difference between careful and thorough, and I was trying to thread a needle that maybe I shouldn't have been threading. A pause. If I'd moved faster, then you might have moved wrong, he said. Moved without enough to hold it together legally, and he walks and everything resets with you weakened and him knowing you're on to him. She was quiet. You weren't wrong to be careful, he said. Things worked out. You were very generous with that assessment given that you spent your morning doing things that are not in your contract. He shrugged. The contract was for engineering documents, which you did deliver, technically. She stopped at the edge of the lobby cafe, which had remained open throughout the morning in the specific way that coffee places in large buildings remain open through anything short of an actual evacuation. The barista behind the counter was a college-age kid who had clearly been asked a lot of questions by a lot of people today, and had the look of someone who had answered all of them and was now just trying to keep the espresso machine from backing up. What can I get you? I'm okay. You have a cut on your ear, and you've been awake since... She tilted her head. When did you get up this morning? 5:15. You've been awake since 5:15. You fought 5 people before 9 in the morning. You went up and down this building 4 times, and you tracked a data theft operative to a server room. She looked at him. Let me get you a sandwich. He considered the granola bar in his backpack. All right, he said. They sat at a small cafe table near the window, the same window through which Ethan had watched Briggs' man disappear into the east corridor 2.5 hours ago. The afternoon light was coming at an angle now, cutting across the marked floor and the evidence tags and the last 2 officers still working the perimeter. Vanessa had her phone on the table and was managing a stream of messages with one hand while eating half a turkey sandwich with the other, and Ethan ate the other half of the turkey sandwich in the deliberate way he ate most things, without paying it much attention, because the part of his brain usually assigned to meals was occupied with running a slow review of the morning. There were things he was still sitting with. The document Briggs had carried, boom, that would be in the evidence chain now, and whatever it contained would help build the case against Holloway. The man from the server room would have his own story, and that story would lead somewhere too. The 6th floor access card trail was already a thread that investigators would pull until it unraveled completely. But what he kept coming back to was simpler than any of that. It was the moment in the lobby, not the 11 seconds, not the tactical picture, but the moment before it. The moment when he'd set his envelope down on the decorative table, the manila folder with its contract forms and delivery confirmation slips, and walked toward a problem that wasn't his. He'd done it without the argument, without the hesitation. He wasn't sure, sitting here with a half-eaten sandwich and dried blood on his ear, whether that was something to feel good about or something to examine. Both, maybe. It was both. You're very quiet, Vanessa said, not looking up from her phone. I'm usually quiet. You've been quiet in different ways all morning. That one's the thinking kind. He looked at her. You've known me 4 hours. 3.5, she said, still scrolling. And you're not hard to read if you pay attention. She set the phone down and looked at him directly, and it occurred to him that this was something she probably did deliberately. The phone down, the full attention, the shift that said, this part is not for the record. What are you thinking about? He thought about how to answer that. My daughter's going to ask me about my day, he said. Vanessa waited. She always does. When I pick her up, she's got... He paused. She's got about 8 minutes of questions backed up by 3 o'clock, and she starts the moment the car door closes. Or the bus door this week, since the truck's in the shop. She wants to know what I did and who I talked to and whether anything interesting happened. And you're trying to figure out what to tell her. I'm trying to figure out how to make it boring enough that I don't have to explain too much, he said. She's 7. She worries. About you. Yeah. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a news van had pulled up to the curb. The second one today, a different channel from the first. The morning had graduated to afternoon news cycle, which meant the story was shaping itself into something that would be on screens across the city by 6 o'clock. Ethan's name was not in any of the statements he'd given, and he intended to keep it that way. She knows what you did before? Vanessa asked. The Navy, the SEAL part. She knows I was in the military. I told her when she was 5, in the way you tell a 5-year-old, I helped keep people safe. I was very far away, but now I'm home and I'm not going anywhere. He looked at the table. She doesn't know the specifics. She doesn't need to. But she knows something, Vanessa said. Kids always know something. He thought of Macy at the kitchen table last month, doing her reading homework, looking up at him with the particular expression she got when she was processing a large thought in a small body. She'd said, "Daddy, when you were in the Navy, were you the kind that went underwater or the kind that did other stuff?" And he'd said the kind that did other stuff. And she'd nodded like that confirmed a hypothesis and gone back to her book. "Yeah," he said. She knows something. Vanessa looked at him for a moment longer. Then she picked her phone back up. "I have 12 more messages from my general counsel," she said, "and I need to be on a call in 9 minutes." She said it matter-of-factly, snapping back into the executive frequency with the ease of someone who had always been able to hold 2 modes at once. "Ethan," he looked up. "I don't know how to properly account for what you did today," she said, "and I don't think you want me to try, at least not in any formal sense. No. But I want you to know that I understand it, what it cost, not the physical part, though I'm aware the physical part was not nothing." She paused. "The other part, the choice to walk into something when you didn't have to." He didn't say anything. "Macy should be proud of her father," she said, "even if she only gets the boring version." He looked out the window, where the news van was setting up its shot, and the afternoon was doing what afternoons did, and the building around them was trying to normalize itself into something that looked, from the outside, like an ordinary Tuesday. "She usually is," he said. Vanessa took her call. Ethan finished his coffee and collected his backpack and picked up his envelope, the manila folder that had started the morning and survived it, and checked his watch. 12:22. He had until 2:15 to make the bus. He had time. He made the 2:15 bus with 6 minutes to spare. The stop was half a block from Crownstone's main entrance, and he stood at it with his backpack and his envelope and his cold thermos and watched a second news van park behind the first, while a reporter he didn't recognize practiced her stand-up delivery facing the building's glass facade. She was gesturing at the entrance. Her expression was calibrated to convey gravity. He looked away. The bus came. He got on, found a window seat near the back, and sat down. For the first 3 stops, he didn't think about anything in particular. He let the city pass, the blocks of commercial frontage giving way to residential, the trees that appeared as you moved away from downtown, the particular quality of Tuesday afternoon light on streets that were quiet because school hadn't let out yet. His ear ached at a low frequency. His knuckle was stiff under the tape. His left shoulder had a pull in it from the large man in the lobby, the one who'd landed a hit before going down. And that pull would be worse tomorrow morning, the way these things always were. He thought about Macy. She'd been in 2nd grade for 2 months now, and had opinions about it that she delivered at length and in no particular order. The reading was fine. The math was okay, but the teacher explained it a weird way. A girl named Priya was her best friend, and they sat next to each other at lunch, except on Fridays when the seating was different, and that was annoying. There was a boy named Oscar who said something rude on the playground last week, and Macy had told him it wasn't nice, and he'd said sorry, and now they were not enemies, but not friends either, which Macy described as a situation under review. She was 7 years old, and she managed the social architecture of her life with more deliberate intention than most adults he'd met. He got off at the Clearfield stop at 2:51 and walked the 4 blocks to Riverside Elementary at his usual pace, which got him to the front gate at 2:58. The afternoon pickup crowd was in its standard configuration, a loose scattering of parents and grandparents and occasional older siblings, everyone oriented toward the double doors at the end of the walkway. The practiced patience of people who had done this enough times that the waiting had become a kind of rest. He knew a few of them by name. Linda, who picked up a boy named Carter and always asked how the work was going. Marcus, a grandfather who drove a green sedan and nodded at Ethan every day with the mutual recognition of 2 people who had both decided that nodding was sufficient social exchange. A woman named Beth, who worked from her phone while she waited and looked up at the exact moment the doors opened every time without fail, like she'd timed herself. He stood near the fence and waited. The doors opened at 3:02. Macy came through in the second wave. She was never first, because she had a process for packing her backpack that she was not willing to rush, and this had been true since the first day of kindergarten and gave no signs of changing. She had her jacket half on, one arm in and one trailing, and her backpack was over both shoulders and slightly too large for her frame, which was true of most 7-year-olds' backpacks, but was especially true of Macy's because she put things in it that didn't need to be there. Rocks, usually. Art supplies. Once, a library book she'd already returned and then found again and decided she wanted to think about. She scanned the crowd the way she always did, methodically, left to right. And when she found him, her face did the thing that it did, the uncomplicated and complete thing, the thing that had no performance in it at all. She covered the distance between them in a way that was not quite running because she was 7 and had opinions about running toward people being babyish, but was not walking either. He crouched down to her level. "Hi," she said. "Hi, Bug." She put her arms around his neck. He put his arms around her and held on for a moment, her backpack pressing against his hands, her hair against his face, the specific small person weight of her that he'd memorized so completely that he sometimes felt it when she wasn't there. The ghost weight of a presence that mattered more than most things. Then she pulled back and looked at him with the particular forensic attention she applied to things she found interesting. "What happened to your ear?" she said. "I bumped it." She looked at the tape on his knuckle. "And your hand?" "Same thing, bumped into some stuff at work." She narrowed her eyes. She had brown eyes, the same color as her mother's. And when she narrowed them in that specific way, she looked so much like Claire that Ethan had to do the small internal thing he'd learned to do. Acknowledge it, let it be what it was, keep going. "You bumped your ear and your hand," she said. "It was a complicated bump." She considered this. "Okay," she said, with the tone of someone filing something under incomplete but acceptable for now. She took his hand, the uninjured one, and they started walking toward the bus stop. "How was school?" he asked. The question started, as they always did, in the other direction. "Good. We did fractions. They're not that hard. Priya thinks they're hard, but I think she's just thinking about them wrong. Also, we had library and I found a book about deep-sea creatures and I already checked it out. It's in my bag. Do you want to see it?" She looked up at him. "Are we having pasta tonight?" "Was planning on it." "Good. I've been thinking about pasta since 11:30. She said this with total seriousness. "What did you do today?" "Delivered some documents." "What kind?" "Engineering documents, contract stuff, paperwork." "Was it boring?" He thought about the lobby, the 11 seconds. The server room, Gavin Holloway's annual report face as the elevator doors closed. "Parts of it," he said. She accepted this and moved on because the deep-sea creature book was more interesting than his paperwork, which was correct. She spent the bus ride showing him photographs of anglerfish and vampire squid with the enthusiasm of someone who had recently discovered that the world contained considerably more varieties of terrifying than previously known and found this mostly delightful. He looked at the pictures when she held the book up. He said the right things. He was present for all of it. The vampire squid, the bus stop, the 4 blocks home, the pasta he put on while she did homework at the kitchen table and narrated the homework to him because she'd never learned to work in silence. But underneath it, the day was still there. It was going to be there for a while. He knew that about himself. Knew the way his brain held on to operations, turned them over, looked for the things he'd missed, or could have done differently. The large man in the lobby he'd taken a hit from. The utility closet breaker he should have thought of 60 seconds earlier than he did. The duffel bag he'd lost track of in the initial engagement. He'd also, by any reasonable accounting, stopped a coordinated corporate theft and an armed assault on a CEO before 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. And he had the medical tape and the earache to prove it. He put water on for pasta and told himself that was enough. The news was on the small kitchen television at 6 o'clock, as it was most evenings. Low volume, more habit than attention. Mechi was on the couch by then with her deep-sea book, conducting what she described as further research. The pasta was done. Ethan was cleaning up the cutting board when he heard the anchor say, "Crownstone Dynamics," and looked at the screen. The footage was from the news van he'd watched set up its shot from the bus stop. The reporter was standing in front of the glass entrance giving the establishing summary, "Armed intruders, CEO targeted, building briefly under lockdown." Then the package cut to security footage from the lobby, and Ethan set down the cutting board. He looked like a stranger. That was the first and most consistent thing he thought whenever he saw footage of himself in an operational context. The person on screen did not move the way Ethan felt himself moving from the inside. The person on screen looked unhurried in a way that bordered on strange, moving through a situation that had everyone else frozen with the mild purposefulness of someone locating a specific tool in a familiar workshop. The anchor said, "The individual who intervened has been identified by witnesses as a contractor in the building on a routine service call. His name has not been released at his request." Macy looked up from her book. Ethan moved the cutting board to the dish rack. "Dad," Macy said. "Hmm?" "That looked like your jacket." He turned off the television. "Pasta's ready." She stared at the blank screen for a moment. Then she got off the couch and came to the kitchen table and sat down, and he put her bowl in front of her, and she looked at it and then looked at him. "Was that you?" she said. He sat down across from her. He'd thought about this, not extensively because he hadn't known it was coming this fast, but he'd thought about it on the bus and briefly while the water boiled. The boring version. He told himself the boring version. But Macy was 7, not 5, and the distance between 7 and 5 in terms of what she could hold was longer than most people accounted for, and she was looking at him now with a steadiness that was not a child's look, but something older than that, something she'd developed in the specific way that children develop specific things when the regular script of their life gets interrupted early and they have to build an amended version. Her mother had died when Macy was 3. She didn't remember it clearly. But she'd grown up in the space that loss made, and she'd learned, the way kids learn things without being taught, that the world was not reliably in the shape people tried to tell her it was. "Dad," she said again, "Was that you?" He picked up his fork, then he put it back down. "Yeah," he said, "that was me." She looked at him for a long moment. He let her. He'd learned in 4 years of solo parenting that with Macy the silence before the question was often more important than the question, and filling it was never the right move. "Did you get hurt?" she said. "A little. Not badly." "Your ear." "And my hand. Both fine." She looked at the tape on his knuckle, then at his ear, then at his face, doing her assessment. "Were you scared?" she said. He thought about that. "Not during," he said. "A little after, maybe, when things settle down and you have time to think about what could have happened." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense?" she said, in the tone she used when something confirmed an existing theory. She picked up her fork, twirled some pasta, put it in her mouth and chewed. He watched her. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I mean," she swirled her fork again. "I had a lot of questions, but you answered most of them already. The main ones." She looked at him over her pasta. "The woman on the floor. The one he pushed. Is she okay?" "She's fine." "Good," said firmly, with feeling. "That was mean." "It was." Macy ate more pasta. "You didn't have to help her," she said. "Right? Like nobody made you. Nobody made me." She thought about that for a moment. "But you did anyway." "Yeah." She nodded, the way she'd nodded when he explained fractions once, and she got to the part where they clicked into place, like something had arrived at its correct position. "Okay," she said again, and went back to her dinner. He watched her for another moment, this small and serious person sitting across his kitchen table with pasta and deep-sea creature knowledge, and a backpack full of rocks, and a matter-of-fact willingness to absorb the world as it actually was, rather than the version of it people kept trying to hand her. He picked up his own fork. Outside, the city was doing what it always did after a news cycle, processing, arguing, speculating, forming opinions about things that were more complicated than opinions could hold. By morning, there would be more coverage. The story had the elements that stories needed to keep going: a CEO, a conspiracy, a criminal operation dismantled, a man who'd walked into it without being asked. Detective Raines had his number. He'd give whatever statements were needed, sign whatever he needed to sign, show up wherever he was required to show up. The legal process would take as long as the legal process took, which in his experience was always longer than anyone projected and produced outcomes that were approximately correct, even when they weren't exactly right. He ate his pasta. At 7:30, he read 2 chapters of the deep-sea creature book aloud to Macy at her request, because she wanted to hear the anglerfish section read dramatically, and he obliged, and she corrected his pronunciation of bioluminescence 3 times before he got it right. At 8 o'clock, she was in bed. At 8:15, she was asleep, in the sudden total way that children fall asleep, present and then not, like a switch. He stood in the hallway outside her room for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen and called Dale about the truck. "Thursday," Dale said. "I told you Thursday." "You said Thursday or Friday." "It's going to be Thursday." "What time Thursday?" "I don't know, Ethan. Thursday." He hung up and made himself a cup of coffee he probably shouldn't have had at 8:20 in the evening and sat at the kitchen table with it and thought about the morning. His phone had 4 missed messages. 2 were from numbers he didn't recognize, which he ignored. One was from the facilities manager at another client, a scheduling question about next week, nothing urgent. The 4th was from a number he also didn't recognize, but with a 212 area code and a message that said simply, "This is Vanessa Whitmore. Rains gave me your number. The board meeting went well. I hope your daughter liked the pasta. VW." He looked at the message for a moment, then he typed, "She did. Board meeting went well, how?" He put the phone down and drank his coffee. 3 minutes later it buzzed. Remove 2 board members connected to Holloway. Vote was 7-2 to maintain current leadership and initiate a full governance review. The 2 who voted against are already lawyering up, which tells you everything. VW. He picked up the phone. "Good," he typed. "Rains get everything she needed? For now." The device from the server room had a partial extraction, about 60% of the partition before the power cut. Not enough to be useful, apparently. My IT director was very pleased with himself about that, though he's never going to admit the power cut idea wasn't his. VW. He almost smiled at that. "Gavin?" he typed. "In custody. His attorney is already trying to frame it as unauthorized use of his credentials by a third party. It won't work. The financial trail connecting him to Kane's operation goes back 8 months. The DA's office called me at 5:30. They seem confident." VW. A pause. Then another message. "You didn't give your name to the media." VW. "No," he typed. "The footage is everywhere. Every outlet in the city. Nobody knows who you are." VW. "That's the idea," he typed. Another pause. Longer this time. "Why?" VW. He thought about how to answer that. He'd been asked different versions of the same question at different points in his life. Why don't you talk about it? Why don't you take credit? Why does it matter whether anyone knows? And the answer had changed over the years, or rather, the answer had stayed the same, but his understanding of why it was the answer had changed. He typed, "Because it doesn't matter for the thing to have happened. The thing happened. That's enough." A long pause this time. Long enough that he'd finished his coffee before the next message came. That's a hard thing to actually believe. Most people say it, but don't mean it. VW. He looked at that. "I have evidence of it being true," he typed. "Most things that mattered in my life nobody saw, still mattered." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The reply came after another minute. "I believe you." He put the phone on the table and looked at the kitchen. The pasta pot was clean and in the drying rack. Macy's homework was stacked on the corner of the table, neat because she'd done it herself, slightly uneven because she was 7. Her deep-sea creature book was on the counter because she'd said she wanted it accessible, which in practice meant it was somewhere she could see it from the couch. There were crayon drawings on the refrigerator, held on by an assortment of mismatched magnets that Macy collected with the same energy she applied to rocks. He looked at them. A yellow sun above a house, 2 people of notably different heights, a dog they didn't have but that Macy had been negotiating for since May. The refrigerator also had a note in her handwriting, printed carefully in pencil on a piece of torn notebook paper, tucked under a magnet shaped like a pineapple. It said, "Pasta tonight?" Then underneath, yes or no with boxes next to them. She'd checked yes herself. He'd found it there this morning before he left. He'd checked yes, too, in the other box. He thought about that. Leaving the house this morning, checking the box, not knowing what the morning was going to be. The ordinary sequence of it. Thermos, envelope, badge check, bus. And then the doors opening and Briggs Kane walking through them. And the calculation, and the 11 seconds, and everything that followed. He'd checked the box and then gone and done the day, and here he was. The phone buzzed once more. "I have a board presentation in the morning and approximately 400 emails and a call with the DA at 9, so I should sleep. But I wanted to say, I know I said something like this in the lobby cafe, and I know you'll probably deflect again, so I'll keep it short. What you did today mattered to a lot of people who will never know your name. That's an unusual thing to be able to say about a Tuesday. VW. He looked at the message for a while. Then he typed, "Get some sleep, Vanessa. You've got a company to run tomorrow." He put the phone face down on the table and sat with the quiet kitchen for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside. From the direction of Macy's room came the absolute silence of a child in deep sleep, which was its own kind of sound if you'd been listening for it long enough. He was tired in the bone-level way. The kind of tired that didn't feel bad exactly, just present. The kind that came after a day that had been too large and had ended anyway, the way large days did. He rinsed his coffee cup. He checked the door locks. Front and back, which he always did. Not from anxiety, but from the same habit that made him carry a first aid kit and kept his back to the wall in restaurants and had kept him alive at various times in places that were not this kitchen. He turned off the lights. In the dark hallway outside Macy's room, he stopped for a moment, the way he always did, just long enough to hear her breathing through the slightly open door. Even, slow, the particular rhythm of a person whose whole life was still happening in front of her. Then he went to his own room and took off his jacket. The faded one, the worn one, the one the news footage had shown from 4 camera angles across 9 different broadcasts, and hung it on the back of the chair and sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the tape off his knuckle. The cut was clean, shallow. It would be nothing by the weekend. He lay down. The ceiling was the same ceiling it was every night. A small crack in the plaster near the light fixture that he'd been meaning to patch for 6 months. A water stain in the corner from the winter before last that was cosmetic and not structural, and he'd confirmed this twice. Familiar. Ordinary. He closed his eyes. The morning had started at 5:15, and it had been a specific kind of morning. And now it was over, and Macy was asleep in the next room with her book about deep-sea creatures and her checked box on the refrigerator note, and the 8 minutes of questions she'd be backing up by 3 o'clock tomorrow. And Gavin Holloway was in custody, and Briggs Kane was in custody, and the patent partition was intact, and Vanessa Whitmore had a company to run. He'd delivered the engineering documents. He'd made the pasta. He'd made it home. That was enough for a Tuesday. That was more than enough. And in the practiced, quiet way of a man who had learned, slowly, imperfectly, over a lot of years and a lot of different kinds of days, that enough was not a small word, he let the day close, and he slept. Show more tray. 3 weeks passed the way weeks pass after something large has happened. Not quickly, not slowly, but with the specific texture of time that has been altered by an event and hasn't fully resettled into its ordinary shape yet. The truck came back from Dale's on Thursday, as promised, and Ethan paid the bill without arguing about the labor charge, even though he thought it was $15 high, because Dale had fit him in ahead of 2 other jobs, and that was worth something. Macy declared the truck's return a significant improvement over the bus, which she found acceptable but not ideal because the seats were harder. He did not disagree. He had 3 other contract jobs that week. A facilities inspection at a medical building on the east side, a structural assessment for a small manufacturing plant that was renovating its loading bay, a documentation review for a warehouse that was updating its safety compliance records. Standard work, the kind that required precision and patience and produced a specific kind of satisfaction in him. Not excitement, but the solid, reliable feeling of a thing done correctly. He gave a formal written statement to Detective Raines on Wednesday of that week. The interview took 90 minutes in a room at the precinct that smelled like bad coffee and dry erase markers, and Raines asked her questions with the same focused efficiency she'd brought to the lobby on the morning of the incident. She told him, at the end, that the case against Holloway was building well. The financial trail was extensive and had been partially self-documented by Holloway himself, in the specific way that people who believe their operation is invisible sometimes document things that would have been better left undocumented. The man from the server room, his name was Teller, Marcus Teller, a data specialist with a history of corporate espionage contracted through a shell company, had agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced charge. His cooperation had given the DA's office 6 additional months of communication history between Holloway and Briggs Kane. Briggs himself was facing 5 counts. His attorney was making arguments that Raines described, with a dryness that she'd clearly developed over years of listening to attorneys make arguments, as creative. It means they won't work, she said. I figured, Ethan said. You'll be called as a witness, probably late spring if it goes to trial. Could be earlier if Holloway decides to plead. Let me know. She looked at him across the table with the same look she'd given him on the morning of the slightly recalibrating look of someone adjusting their mental file on a person. You're not curious about how it comes out? She said. I know how it comes out, he said. The details take longer. She'd nodded at that, the way people nod when they're not sure if something is wisdom or exhaustion and have decided it might be both. The coverage lasted longer than Ethan had expected. 2 weeks of recurring news cycles, each one adding a layer. The financial conspiracy angle, the board shakeup, the identity speculation about the unnamed contractor. Several outlets ran versions of the same story. Hero in the lobby. Who is he? One of them published a composite sketch based on witness descriptions that looked, to Ethan's eye, mostly like a generic middle-aged white man in a jacket, which was accurate as far as it went. His name never appeared in any of it. Macy saw one of the follow-up stories on television during the second week, a longer piece that included more security footage. She watched it without saying anything, eating cereal, her eyes going between the screen and her father at the kitchen table with his coffee. When the piece ended, she said, "They can't figure out who you are." Looks that way. Doesn't that bother them? Probably. Does it bother you that it doesn't bother them? He'd looked at her. What does that mean? She'd swirled her spoon in her cereal thoughtfully. I mean, like, don't you want people to know it was you? He'd thought about how to answer that with a 7-year-old's framework rather than his own. You know it was me, he said. That's enough, people. She'd considered this seriously. Then, okay, but I'm telling Priya. He hadn't argued with that. The call from Vanessa came on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks and 2 days after the incident. He was in the truck, parked outside the warehouse where he'd just finished the compliance review, filling out the last section of his report on a clipboard with a pen that was running low on ink. I have a proposal, she said without preamble, which he'd come to understand was her default register for things she'd thought carefully about and was ready to commit to. Okay, he said, I'm establishing a foundation. Veterans transitioning to civilian careers, specifically skilled trades and technical work, because that's where the gap actually is, and most foundations fund the wrong things. Job placement is not the problem. Skills translation is the problem. She paused. I want an advisory board. People who understand both the military and the civilian technical work environment. I'd like you to be one of them. He set the clipboard on the passenger seat. Outside the windshield, the warehouse parking lot was ordinary and still. 2 other vehicles, a chain-link fence, the late afternoon light doing what it did in October. That's not my background, he said. Program management or foundation work. I know, that's not why I want you. She paused. I want someone who has actually done the thing, not administered it or studied it or made policy about it. Someone who went from that world to this one with nothing handed to them and figured it out anyway. Another pause. You can tell me no. He looked at the clipboard, at the pen that was running out of ink, at the warehouse building, which was a plain industrial structure that didn't ask anything of him except accuracy and showing up on time. How much of a time commitment, he said. Quarterly meetings, ad hoc consultations when something needs a perspective I don't have. 2, maybe 3 hours a month in a normal month. I have a daughter. I know. The role is built around people who have actual lives. A pause. The meetings would be scheduled 3 months out. I don't do emergency calls unless something is actually an emergency. He was quiet for a moment. Part-time, he said. I keep my contracts. That's the only version I'm offering, she said. I need someone with a life outside this, not someone who needs the title. He picked up his clipboard again. The last section of the compliance report was 2 checkboxes and a signature. He signed it. All right, he said. A beat. All right, you'll do it, or all right, you'll think about it. All right, I'll do it. She was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and he had the same impression he'd gotten in the lobby cafe when she made the brief thing that was close to a laugh, that she was doing something with her face that she wasn't going to describe. Good, she said. I'll have someone send you the details next week. Okay? How's the truck? He looked at the dashboard. Running, he said. For now. That's all you need, she said, and ended the call. He sat in the truck for another minute, in the parking lot, with the compliance report on the clipboard and the pen that was out of ink, and the October light going slant across the windshield. He thought about what he'd just agreed to. He turned it over the way he turned most things over, looking for the problems in it, the angles he hadn't seen, the places where the thing would cost more than it appeared to. He didn't find many. He started the truck and drove to pick up Macy. The Foundation's inaugural board meeting was on a Thursday morning 6 weeks later, in a conference room on the 32nd floor of Crownstone Dynamics that was not the same room where Gavin Holloway had been sitting when Rains walked in, but was in the same building, which Ethan noticed and then set aside as the kind of thing you notice and then set aside. There were 7 people in the room. Vanessa at the head of the table, a retired Army logistics officer named Patterson, who had the compact, organized manner of someone who had spent decades making complicated things work. A woman named Delgado, who ran a vocational training nonprofit and had the specific patience of someone who'd heard every excuse for why something couldn't be done and had stopped being interested in excuses some years back. 2 people from Crownstone's HR and operations divisions. A labor attorney named Kim, who had apparently advised Vanessa on the Foundation's legal structure and was present to make sure nobody made promises that created liability. And Ethan, with a legal pad he'd brought because he didn't own anything more professional than a legal pad, and a pen that actually worked, sitting near the middle of the table feeling approximately the way he always felt in rooms like this. Alert to the room's dynamics, moderately comfortable, not sure he was the right person for whatever the room needed, but willing to find out. Vanessa ran the meeting with the same economy she brought to most things. No preamble about inspiration or mission statements. She laid out the structure, the funding, the 3-year plan, the specific gaps she'd identified in the existing veteran support landscape, skills translation, not job placement, exactly as she'd described it on the phone, and asked each person around the table for their read on the plan's weakest point. Patterson said the intake process was underestimating how long skills assessment actually took in practice. Delgado said the 3-year timeline was optimistic for demonstrating measurable placement outcomes, and they should build in an 18-month assessment checkpoint. Kim said the liability structure around the training partnerships needed another look. Ethan said the program assumed veterans would self-identify skills gaps accurately, which they often wouldn't, not because they were dishonest, but because the translation problem ran in both directions. They didn't know what civilian employers called the things they already knew how to do. Vanessa wrote all of it down. Not on a laptop. On paper, with a pen, in handwriting that was fast and slightly compressed, the way people write when the writing is for thinking and not for display. That last point, she said, looking at Ethan, expand that. He thought about how to put it plainly. When I got out, he said, I knew how to do about 30 things at a professional level. Structural assessment, equipment maintenance, logistics under pressure, team coordination in low information environments, but I didn't know what those were called in civilian job listings. I'd look at a posting and not recognize my own experience in it because the language was completely different and nobody was helping me translate. He paused. I figured it out because I had time and a specific reason to push through the frustration. A lot of guys don't have both of those. They get discouraged at the application stage and conclude there's nothing for them, when actually there's plenty. They just can't see it in the format it's being presented. Delgado was nodding. We call it credential blindness in the nonprofit space. The veteran has the competency, the employer has the need, but the vocabulary doesn't connect them. That's exactly what it is, Ethan said. Vanessa wrote something down, underlined it. The intake process needs a skills translation component, she said to Patterson. Not self-reported. Structured assessment with someone who knows both vocabularies. Adds cost, Patterson said. Everything that works adds cost, Vanessa said without heat. That's what the budget revision is for. The meeting ran 2 hours and 15 minutes. It resolved 4 items, flagged 3 for follow-up, and assigned specific tasks to specific people with specific deadlines, which in Ethan's experience was the difference between a meeting and a conversation with chairs. When it ended, he picked up his legal pad, which had more notes on it than he'd expected to take, and followed the group toward the elevator. Vanessa fell into step beside him in the corridor. That was useful, she said. The credential blindness piece. Delgado already knew it. Delgado knew the theory. You knew the experience. Those aren't the same thing, and the room felt the difference. She pressed the elevator call button. How'd it feel? The meeting? He thought about that honestly. Strange, he said. Good kind of strange. I kept wanting to ask whose problem I was supposed to be solving. That's the right instinct, she said. That's what I need in the room. The elevator came. How's Macy? She got 100 on her fractions test. Tell her I said congratulations. She'll want to know who you are. Tell her I'm someone your dad helped out. He looked at her briefly. She'll have follow-up questions. She sounds like someone I'd like, Vanessa said, and stepped into the elevator. He took the stairs because the stairs were there, and the elevator felt like waiting, and because some habits were not worth breaking even when the reason for them was no longer strictly operational. Holloway's case resolved in late January. Not a trial. A plea, as Raines had suggested might happen, negotiated down from 8 counts to 4 in exchange for full cooperation and a detailed account of the conspiracy's financial architecture, which turned out to extend further than the initial investigation had reached. 2 additional individuals connected to Holloway's operation entered plea agreements in the weeks that followed. One of the 2 board members who had changed their votes 8 months earlier cooperated with investigators voluntarily. The other did not, and faced separate proceedings. Holloway was sentenced on a Wednesday morning. Ethan read about it in a brief article that ran in the business section of the city paper, which he looked at on his phone over coffee while Macy ate breakfast across from him. The article mentioned Crownstone Dynamics, the events of that Tuesday in October, the unnamed contractor who had intervened in the lobby. It described Holloway's sentence in a single sentence. He put the phone down. Macy looked at him. Bad news? No, he said. Actually good news. What kind? He thought about how to put it in second-grade terms. Someone who did something wrong got told about it officially, he said. In the right way. She considered this. Is it the lobby thing? Yeah. Good, she said, with the same firm, uncomplicated feeling she'd brought to it on the first night. She went back to her cereal. Is it done now? He thought about Raines, who had texted him the same morning with a message that said simply, Holloway sentenced. 6 years, full restitution, case closed on our end. Thank you for everything. He thought about the Foundation's second board meeting scheduled for February. He thought about the patent partition, fully intact on an isolated server, the company's future still in the building it had always been in. Yeah, he said, it's done. Briggs Kane's case took until March. The 5 counts stood. No plea, an actual trial, 4 days of testimony that Ethan was not called for because the physical evidence and surveillance footage were apparently sufficient without him. Briggs was convicted on all 5 counts. His sentencing was not in the business section. It was in a smaller article, farther back. Ethan read it at the same kitchen table, over the same coffee. Macy was at school. The house was quiet in the way it was quiet on weekday mornings. A productive quiet. The quiet of a space between things. He thought about the lobby, about the 11 seconds and the document in the jacket and the cold calculation in Briggs Kane's face when he'd finally understood that the man in the faded jacket was not going to move. He thought about Vanessa on the lobby floor, palm pressed against marble, furious in a way that was more useful than fear. He thought about the elevator going up to 23 and the utility closet and the sound of the server rack going quiet. He thought about a lot of things that had happened in a very short window of time, and then he finished his coffee and rinsed the cup and went to work. There is something that most people misunderstand about the kind of man Ethan Grayson was, and it is this. The restraint was not performance. It was not humility of the practiced, deliberate variety that people develop because it reads well or protects them from accountability. It was something quieter than that, and older. It was the understanding, arrived at not in a single moment but over many years of things that had no clean resolution, that recognition and meaning were not the same thing, and that most of what mattered in a life would happen without an audience. He had known this before the lobby. He had known it when he left the Navy and came home to a daughter who was 3 years old and needed breakfast made and bedtime maintained and someone to show up at the pickup gate at 3 o'clock. And none of that had ever made the news, and none of it was less important for that. What the morning at Crownstone had done, what it had added, if it had added anything, was not a story about who he was. He already knew who he was. It had maybe clarified something for the people around him, but clarity for others had never been what drove him, and it wasn't now. What he thought about when he thought about that Tuesday was the weight of Macy's backpack against his hands when he crouched down at the school gate, the checked box on the refrigerator note, the pasta water that had been boiling when the news came on, the ordinary, accumulative, undramatic texture of a life that he'd chosen deliberately and continued to choose day after day, not because it was easy or because it looked like anything in particular from the outside, but because it was the right life for the people in it. That was the thing he could not have explained to a reporter, which was part of why he hadn't tried. In April, the foundation launched publicly. Vanessa announced it at a press conference that Ethan watched on his laptop during a lunch break at a job site, eating a sandwich, with the sound low because the site was loud. She spoke for 12 minutes. She was direct and specific, and did not use the kind of language that foundations usually used. No transformation, no empowering, no changing the landscape. She said there was a gap, and they were going to put something practical in it, and here was what that looked like. She mentioned near the end that the foundation had an advisory board that included veterans who had made the transition themselves. She didn't mention names. She didn't mention the lobby. He finished his sandwich and went back to work. In May, Macy turned 8. She had a party with 6 friends, a cake that she designed herself, and that was structurally compromised but tasted fine, and a scavenger hunt in the backyard that Ethan had set up the night before based on cryptic instructions Macy had given him, because she had decided she wanted to be surprised by her own party, which was a logical framework that he'd decided not to examine too closely. She got the deep-sea creature book in a hardcover edition from the school library's book fair. She got a rock tumbler from her grandmother. She got from Ethan a small terrarium that they'd agreed to populate together, at her specification, with plants of her choosing when they could find the right ones. The day after her birthday, unpacking the terrarium, she said, "Dad, do you ever think about that day, the lobby day?" He was reading the instruction sheet for the terrarium's drainage layer. "Sometimes," he said. "Why?" She was arranging the packaging materials in a pile with the particular organization she brought to all physical tasks. "I think about it sometimes," she said, "not in a scared way, just like, I think about you walking toward them." He looked at her. "I think it was brave," she said. Then immediately, "I know you don't like when I say stuff like that." "I don't mind." She looked at him sideways. "You kind of do." He put the instruction sheet down. "What made you think about it?" She shrugged, in the way she shrugged when she had a specific answer, but was deciding whether to give it. Then, "We talked about courage in school. What makes someone brave? And the teacher said brave means doing something even when you're scared, and I said I thought it also meant doing something even when you don't have to." She looked at her pile of packaging materials. She said that was a good point. He was quiet for a moment. "She was right," he said. Macy looked at him. "Which one?" "Both of you." She accepted this. Went back to the packaging, then, "The lady, Vanessa. Can I meet her sometime?" "Maybe," he said. "She's pretty busy." "You could ask." "I could ask." "Will you?" He looked at his daughter, who was 8 years old and had a terrarium to set up and a rock tumbler and a hardcover book about deep-sea creatures and a backpack full of rocks, and a note on the refrigerator that she'd replaced last week with a new one that said simply, "What's for dinner?" He had answered in the box she'd drawn, "Pasta, probably." "Yeah," he said. "I'll ask." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her organizing. He picked up the terrarium instruction sheet and went back to reading. The kitchen was the same kitchen it had been in October. The refrigerator had the same note on it, updated. The crack in the ceiling plaster was still there, still unpatched, still on the list. Outside, the spring was doing what it did, insisting on itself, indifferent to what had or hadn't happened over the winter, just going forward because that was the direction available. He thought about a glass lobby on a Tuesday morning, about an envelope under his arm and a thermos of cold coffee and a visitor badge clipped to a faded jacket. About the moment when the side doors opened and the calculation began, and the thing that was always true of him was simply, quietly, one more time, true. He thought about all of it, and then he put it where he put most things that were finished. Somewhere accessible but no longer urgent. A shelf in the back of himself where the completed things lived. He had a terrarium to help set up. He had dinner to figure out. He had a daughter who was 8 and wanted to meet someone and would remember whether he followed through. That was the shape of his life. And it was the shape he'd chosen, and there was nothing small about it. He folded the instruction sheet and got to work.